The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency, the President.
I'm a receipt of communication from State House dated 8th of August 2025 from Her Excellency the President. And the reads as follows. Dear Mr. President, I wish to inform that I shall be away from office during the period 10th to 31st August 2025 on vacation leave. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of President during my absence. As the Honorable the Senate will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you, therefore, please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honorable the Senate when next it meets? Signed by Her Excellency James Andrew Mason, President of Barbados.
Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
And receipt of minutes of several meetings for confirmation and one for deferral. Minutes of Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the confirmation of the following minutes. The minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 23rd of April, 2025, the meeting of Wednesday, the 30th of April, 2025, June 4th, 2025, June 11th, also in 2025, and June 25th in 2025. These are the minutes moved for confirmation.
The question is that the minutes of our meetings held on April 23rd, April 30th, June 4th, June 11th, and June 25th of 2025 be confirmed. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Meetings yes have it. Those minutes stand confirmed. Senator Cummins.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents. The amendatory contract number 5908/OCBA, amendment number 1, Barbados Climate Resilient South Coast Water Reclamation Project. The second document I am laying this morning is the loan contract 5985 GNBA, Barbados Climate Resilient South Coast Water Reclamation Project. And then finally, the non-reimbursable investment financing agreement number GRT GN 21498, Barbados Climate Resilient South Coast Water Reclamation Project.
We revert to announcements by Your Honor, the President.
By way of announcements, I have received indications of lateness from Senator Dr. Crystal Drakes and Her Excellency Senator the Most Honorable H. Elizabeth Thompson. I'm pleased on this occasion not to make an excuse for our dear Senator Andrew Malado, who has been on medical leave. We're very, 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 very happy to have you back in fine form. We miss not only your contributions from the floor, but your camaraderie off the floor. And we're extremely happy to welcome you back to make your full contribution and for that camaraderie when we're not here in formal debates. Welcome back, and I'm pleased to see you in good health, Senator Malado. Senator Malado.
Mr. President, thank you for those kind words. From my part, I'm pleased to be able to be seen. It was a close one, but I just wanted to maybe use 2 minutes of your time just to say a number of thank yous. Firstly to you, Mr. President, for your numerous calls to me during my recovery. Much appreciated. And in fact, to all those senators who reached out to me through all the various forms of communication to offer me goodwill. I will apologize to anyone on my left for a little while longer, as I no longer look that way very well, so I will have to turn my body to see you. I would also just like to take a couple of moments to say a very big thank you to many of those people who responded to my accident at Motorsport. It was much self-inflicted because it was a voluntary act being in motorsport, but it was a big accident. But to the ambulance, to the people at QEH, to the many doctors who looked after me in a life-threatening condition, and I made it through it, I am very, very appreciative, and to the many friends who have reached out. But finally, sir, very quickly, I would like to pay a special mention to one person, one of our very own, one of the members of this chamber, who made it their business to message me every day for 4 weeks. And they would message me, and they would send me inspirational words, biblical stories, music, and otherwise. And that person who I would like to pay a special mention of thanks to, besides my wife, is, because I should have mentioned her first, so let me remind my wife, who was at my side for 4 weeks, and therefore I could be in a lot of trouble. But besides my wife, who was right next to me for 4 weeks and did not leave, I would like to pay a special mention of that senator who made it their business to write to me every day for 4 weeks without fail, and that was Madam Deputy President, Senator, the Honourable Elizabeth Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Balado. Please continue, Clerk.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sinners of the Senate, moved by minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the reading for the first time.
He'll write the motions. He'll come back to that.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. You think the ayes have it? Standing Order 45-2 is therefore suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
No, we're there, Mr. President. I have a number of bills to move for the first reading, the reading for the first time. Order number 11, Mr. President, to move the first reading of the Firearms Amendment Bill 2025, the first reading of the Criminal Proceedings Witness Anonymity Bill, also all of these bills are 2025, to move the first reading of the Police Amendment Bill, to move the first reading of the Interception of Communications Bill, first reading of the Juries Bill, and finally, to move the first reading of the Family Leave Bill 2025.
The question is that those bills so mentioned, the Firearms Amendment Bill, the Criminal Proceedings Witness Anonymity Bill, the Police Amendment Bill, Interception of Communications Bill, Juries Bill, and Family Leave Bill, all of 2025, be read a first time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. The think the ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read a first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 14, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Interception of Communications Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise this morning to introduce the bill that has just been mentioned by the Honourable President, the Interception of Communications Bill. This bill, Mr. President, constitutes one of many items which constitute the arsenal of interventions that this government, under the leadership of the Office of the Attorney General, would have introduced between 2018 and now. Mr. President, I want to take just a few moments to frame my comments this morning. In the public space, we've heard from members of the public on how they see matters relating to crime. how they feel secure or insecure in their communities. We have heard from the various entities who represent various constituent groups how they feel about matters relating to crime, criminal justice, and the penal system. We've heard from members on how they feel about the police service and the role that the police must take. And I took a few moments, Mr. President, and if you would oblige me, I took the time over the last little while to look at what Barbadians have been speaking about in the public space. I took the time to collate a list of public statements, stories, opinion editorials, headlines that have been carried, social media commentary that has been circulated, and I'm going to share a little bit about that. We've heard from the representatives of political parties, including the opposition, on how they feel about both crime and the measures being taken to combat crime. Sometimes those positions are paradoxical, contradictory, but we have heard. And so I want to take a moment, Mr. President, to speak about what Barbadians en masse from every corner of the island, from St. Lucie, Ms. Brathwaite on the Pike Corner bus, to the student who is traveling on a bus from Sears Court in Christchurch and everything in between. If I were to pull them together in a number of thematic areas, Mr. President, they would cover a couple of things, and I've really spent the time to look at this. It talks about youth violence and youth in crisis. One of the headlines that I found was about a 17-year-old being charged with murder and the average age being 22 years old, Mr. President. There was another instance that we are all very aware of, we spoke about here in this honorable chamber and in many other spaces, of a 13-year-old boy that was shot 4 times in Christchurch. We've heard the business community raising concerns about crime. We've seen, even in today's newspaper, the transport operators and the petrol stations having a conversation around vulnerabilities surrounding crime. We've seen a number of analytical pieces on what they feel coming from the criminologists, what they are seeing, what they are recommending, and how the public has responded to these things. Earlier this year, Mr. President, the Barbados Bar Association, the association that represents the legal profession, they also spoke about their concerns, Mr. President. We have government officials. The Deputy Prime Minister of this country, in addressing her constituency, which has been seeing on recent occasions and historically a number of incidents of crime and violence, we've heard from her how she herself, as the Deputy Prime Minister of this country, has felt about the increases in crime. In January 2025, there was a story, Mr. President, in the Barbados Nation that said that there was a 133% increase in murders. That was 7 murders at a time over January 2024. Mr. President, we saw daylight shootings, whether they were in the area over by just below Hines Hill. We've seen them in historical terms, Mr. President, in areas like Sheraton, broad daylight. And so, Mr. President, if I were to summarize the 3 major headlines that I have been able to identify, they would be the following. The Barbados Today editorial highlighting society increasingly shaken by gunfire, and it said, "Time to reclaim our streets." Then it went on, Mr. President, also in Barbados Today, to say crime is the issue of the year. Then there was another headline, Mr. President, and we all agreed with it. How many more? This was in response to the incident that I spoke about earlier, that 13-year-old boy who should be getting ready to go back into the Lodge School in a few weeks, but instead his mother and his father and his brother are still mourning his loss. So these are some of the stories that we have heard from the public of Barbados. If there was any doubt, Mr. President, any doubt at all, that Barbadians are concerned about crime, the headlines have told the story. On social media, You see the bloggers, they're sharing their concerns, they're having the comments. You read the comments coming from these stories and on social media, and Mr. President, there is unanimity, or there can be nothing other, I should say, than unanimity that there is a concern among Barbadians about crime. All right, so having established, Mr. President, that which we all know, I want to now come, Mr. President, to that which many of us would conveniently not want to know. What has the government of Barbados done because we share these concerns? What has this government in particular done because the concerns of Barbadians are not just legitimate, but they are shared, Mr. President? So what did the government do? I want to share, Mr. President, just the things that have come to this chamber between 2018 and now. Just this chamber, about this and the other place, Mr. President. In 2018, we started, Mr. President, and we made a number of changes. 2018, we saw changes then at the time to the Police Amendment Act. This pulled, Mr. President, enhanced police powers, including curfews, cordons, stop and search powers, seizure of offensive weapons and drugs. The focus in that specific piece of legislation, Mr. President, which was passed, was serious violence, firearms, drug offenses, and maintenance of public order. Then, Mr. President, also in 2018, we saw coming out of a case at the level of the CCJ, the abolition of the mandatory imposition of the death penalty. That was a constitutional motion, and we had that here. Then we had the Offenses Against a Person Act. We had the penal system reform, which looked at improved sentencing guidelines, enhancing mitigation factors for consideration, proceeds and instrumentalities of crime act, Offenses Against the Person, another amendment act in 2019. We saw, Mr. President, then some legislation on children, child justice, child protection, then come to this honorable chamber in 2024, which talked about reforming the juvenile justice system. We then went on, Mr. President, to see a number of additional pieces of legislation. Beyond the legislative interventions, Mr. President, we also have seen and have spoken about at great length in this honorable chamber and in the other place and in public fora, the number of reforms that have taken place overall, not just in the children juvenile justice system, but also, Mr. President, in the broader justice system, the addition of judges, the expansion of the number of courts, measures being introduced that the Attorney General has spoken about as it relates to the speed with which judgments have to be delivered. We've seen a number of overall reforms that have constituted the suite of measures. So, Mr. President, the public has spoken. The newspapers tell the story. But if we listen to some voices, it is no matter what the response is, that is not the response. Or there is not to be a response. Or to make an intervention, Mr. President, let it apply to everyone else, but let it not include me. Everyone else is responsible for fixing the problem. We are asserting the problem needs to be fixed, but not what you are doing, Mr. President. And we saw a meme circulating recently, Mr. President, around what that looks like. Fix the problem of crime, but no, don't do this. Every time the suite of interventions have come, there are those who have stood in loud defiance against the measures. So is it, Mr. President, that there are those who wish to say to the public, screaming loudly from every pulpit, that something needs to be done, that we are to be the do-nothing society? We are to take no action? Mr. President, I want to thank the Honorable Attorney General for taking the opportunity to talk the country through the suite of measures that he has led and has introduced into this country since 2018. I want to thank his team because this has been the largest body of legislation coming from the office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel in a long, long time. Not just structural and institutional reforms, but legislative reforms. So, Mr. President, before us today, the bill that we are considering right now has generated a significant amount of discussion. It has generated discussion, Mr. President, because, thank you, it has generated discussion because, Mr. President, we want what we want, but then we don't want it. So we want crime to be addressed. The government must take back our streets. But who are we taking it back from, if not the criminal element? And every one of the items listed in this piece of legislation, in all 37 sections of this legislation, correlate to the criminal element. It does not correlate, Mr. President, to the Barbadians who are calling for something to be done. It does not correlate to the honorable members who are sitting in this chamber and smiling at me in some instances so sweetly, who I am very confident are law-abiding citizens. It doesn't correlate to them. On any given day, Mr. President, it does not apply to the majority of Barbadians. This legislation, however, attempts to do what the headlines have asked us to do: take back our streets. Now, in previous debates and on many other issues, I have said that I serve in the cabinet and in a government where our Prime Minister has said Barbados must not be afraid to lead. She says Barbados must not be afraid to be pioneering. Barbados must not be afraid to go first. But, Mr. President, on the matter relating to wireless intercept, Barbados has not led. In fact, Mr. President, we are bringing up the rear. This piece of legislation that we are in such objection to is in existence in nearly every Caribbean country across the region. In Jamaica, it was introduced in 2002. In Trinidad and Tobago, it was in existence in 2010. In St. Lucia, it was introduced in 2005. In St. Kitts and Nevis, it was introduced in 2009 and then amended in 2012. In Grenada, it was introduced in 2013. In Guyana in 2008, and Cayman Islands in 2011. Barbados has not led here, Mr. President. Barbados is bringing up the rear. This is legislation that is in existence throughout the region and has not been challenged. But here's where Barbados has led. Here's where Barbados has led. Barbados has taken the draft of the legislation that has come from other jurisdictions and has improved on the legislation in a couple of ways. And I want to identify what some of those things are. Barbados has said, in this case, we want to elevate the right to interfere with what people perceive as the right to privacy. Again, if you are not suspected as part of an investigation and you are not engaged in wrongdoing, no one cares about your supposed political conversations. No one cares. The best kept secret in Barbados, or rather I should say the worst kept secret in Barbados, was made public last week. Everybody knew. There was nothing to announce. Everybody knew this for the longest time, Mr. President. So what is there to listen to? What is there to listen to, Mr. President? And so the legislation makes certain that it identifies the circumstances under which communication can be intercepted. It identifies, Mr. President, the requirements that have to be met in order for communication to be intercepted. It identifies the thresholds that must be met by the Barbados Police Service in order for legislation for communication to be intercepted. And I want to go to what it says now, Mr. President. But before I do that, let me say what the Attorney General in the other place and elsewhere has said publicly. The Honorable Attorney General has said that anyone who practices criminal law and anyone who is familiar with the judicial system knows that from the beginning of time, there has always been interception of communication, and it has functioned without a legal framework to govern it. It has been done and it has been used forever and ever for the purpose of intercepting and thwarting criminal acts. But it has not been able to be used as evidence on a guaranteed basis. A judge may or may not allow it as evidence into the court. But the fact that because it was not collected in a way that had a regulatory arrangement around it, they wanted to right-size it. And in 2018, this was one of the things that they identified and they have pulled together in this current legislation. The legislation then calls on us to do a couple of things, Mr. President. One, it identifies the establishment of an independent monitoring commission. This is where Barbados has also led. Barbados has introduced the idea and the principle of an independent monitoring commission. And if you listened to the presentation from the Honorable Attorney General in the other place, he spoke then of how the commission would be constituted, and he talked about the fact that Barbados is a small society, and sometimes you want to make sure you have the ability to bring persons from outside of the region, beyond the region, to be a part of an independent body. There was also another innovation, Mr. President, that has allowed for the oversight to be required. A warrant must be obtained, and that is one of the things that I will speak about in a short while as an amendment, that a warrant must be obtained in all instances, Mr. President, in order to take this action. Last I checked, Mr. President, Barbados still functions under the principle of separation of powers. There is a judiciary, and the judiciary is staffed by judges. And the judges, unless we intend now in an attempt to score cheap political points, to impugn the integrity of our judiciary, which I hope that we're not going to do, then we would have sunk to an all-time low. But it is still Barbados's judiciary that takes responsibility for administering our legal system. And it is in that judiciary that this government invests its confidence. And on that basis, it requires a warrant, not just from any average judge, not as was misrepresented in the public space from a justice of the peace, but from the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice, the highest judicial office in the land, which no right-thinking citizen should attempt to impugn that office. So the office of the Chief Justice has the responsibility of agreeing to the threshold and saying, yes, you have met that threshold, yes, you can be granted a warrant, and no, you can't be granted a warrant if you do not meet the threshold. In his absence, because that happens, in the absence of the Chief Justice, whoever that may be at the time, a judge that is so designated not by the Attorney General, not by the Prime Minister, not by any minister or any political actor, but by the Chief Justice. Again, an office that is meant to be separate and distinct and responsible for administering our laws. They designate who is that judge to give the warrant order. If a warrant is issued, Mr. President, it has a lifespan. It lives and it dies. It has 4 months based on the legislation that it can be applied for. You have that. At the end of that, Mr. President, another area where Barbados has led is that it requires you to report on what was found. It requires you to report on what was found as relevant to the investigation in question. There are those who will speak a little later on who are lawyers themselves, constitutional lawyers, and constitutional lecturers. They will speak themselves. I have come to accept, Mr. President, that, we live in a society where you only need to read to book or go on social media, and all of a sudden you become an expert on matters that you are not necessarily competent in. And so for me, I do not attempt to assert or arrogate the right unto myself to suddenly become a constitutional lawyer, because I am not that. We have those on this side, and they will speak in due time. So, Mr. President, you have the ability to make sure that there are the protections for during the process of applying and utilizing the warrant. In the event, Mr. President, that you find nothing relevant to your investigation during the course of the warrant, the information that you have intercepted and collected must be destroyed. If, for whatever reason, Mr. President, and here is where Barbados has also innovated, if you want to apply for an extension you can do that, but you have to, again, meet the threshold to justify it. And it has to be in a specific number of areas, and you will see that in the schedule. There is a schedule, Mr. President, that tells you what, Schedule 1, what circumstances you can apply for this warrant, what offenses are applicable. At Schedule 1, it says 1, murder, treason, terrorism, trafficking in persons, kidnapping or abduction. Now, Mr. President, I'm reading these here deliberately because I know that the members of this chamber have read them, but I also know that there's mischief in public communication, and I am sharing it here for the record for the benefit of the public. Murder, treason, terrorism, trafficking in persons, kidnapping or abduction, money laundering, producing, manufacturing, supplying, or otherwise dealing in any dangerous drug in contravention of the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, Cap 131, transporting or storing a dangerous drug where possession of such drug contravenes the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, Cap 131. Number 9, importing or exporting a dangerous drug in contravention of the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, importation, exportation, or transshipment of any firearm in ammunition in contravention of the Firearms Act, and manufacture of or dealing in firearms or ammunition in contravention of the Firearms Act. It then has 4 additional provisions, Mr. President. It goes on to say illegal possession of a prohibited weapon or any other firearm or ammunition in contravention of the Firearms Act, an offense under the Prevention of Corruption Act, one of the pieces of legislation that this administration passed in 2021. It speaks about arson, an offense for which the penalty on conviction is imprisonment for 10 years or more, aiding, abetting, or conspiring to commit any of the offenses referred to in the above paragraphs. And those are 15 paragraphs, paragraphs 1 through 15. Now, the Honorable Attorney General also took the time to speak about why provision 15 is there, which is what he has described as the baseline threshold, which, in his words, says, if you are liable, if you are involved in an activity where if you are convicted for that activity, you can go to prison for 5 years, 2 years, 7 years. That's not a matter for this legislation. The minimum threshold would be that it is an offense that can attract no less than 10 years and so on. So those are the offenses for which a warrant can be applied for and granted. Not, Mr. President, if you're talking to the girl down the street and somebody is listening, and no one cares, Mr. President. That is almost rudimentary now. No one is interested in that, so stop frightening their Barbadians with foolishness. That's not a reality. So, Mr. President, Barbados has led in that regard. Barbados has led in the regard of making sure that it is the Chief Justice and no one else who can grant, and Barbados has led in the establishment of the Independent Commission. But there are a number of amendments, Mr. President, that the Honorable Attorney General has also indicated, and so has the Honorable Prime Minister, need to be made, and I want to draw those amendments to your attention now. All honorable senators would have in their possession copies of those amendments, and I would wish to draw them to your attention. At Clause 5, Paragraph 2, there is a proposed amendment, Mr. President, for the deletion of Clause 5, Paragraph 2 in its entirety. That paragraph reads as follows. It actually proposes to delete Paragraph B and to renumber as follows. C, D, E, F, and G will now become B, C, D, E, and F. And so B is removed. And that allows for an element that now needs to be brought in line with the spirit and the intent of the legislation, as we have already shared, where a warrant is required in every possible instance, Mr. President. There are also meant to be some changes at clauses 13, 14, 21, 24, 26, and then there's some consequential amendments, obviously, as a result of the change at 5.2b and the other ones that I have mentioned. Any other tidying up matters in the legislation will, as is the norm, be referred to the Law Review Commission. They will tidy up the ifs, ands, and buts, the additional words that have been typed, and only one word should be there, whereas you have two. That will be referred to the Law Review Commission, and they will make sure that all of these elements have been addressed. So the one amendment that I do want to draw your attention to, which is an error, where it says there, in many instances, it has the word authority, and the word commission is meant to replace it in every instance where you see that. And then there are some typographical errors that are meant to be changed as well, and you will see that in the document that has been circulated for the benefit of all senators. And as I have already indicated, you will see the changes coming from the Law Review Commission to do the tidying work. Mr. President, having gone through the Intersect legislation, having gone through the reasons for the suite of legislation Barbados has introduced since 2018, having gone through what Barbadians have been calling for and asking for, while others are saying, no, not that, something else, but not offering what the something else is. I want also, Mr. President, to now bring your attention to the feedback that has come in response to what Barbados has done in this space. Mr. President, on matters relating to crime, and I think I've said this before, no one looks at Senator Worrell's house and decides that Senator Worrell wears blue and yellow under the umbrella of the Democratic Labour Party, and so I am going to attack his house, but I'm not going to attack Senator Malalou's house because he doesn't sit under any umbrella. No one makes those choices. People are people. Barbadians are Barbadians. Citizens are citizens. And at the end of the day, if we do not understand that on matters of citizen security and on protecting Barbadians, all of us, not some and not others, all of us, from the criminal element, then we have lost the plot. Then we have reduced national development to political theater. At the end of the day, Mr. President, there are a couple of people who Barbadians hold accountable, however. They hold us accountable for action or inaction. They hold us accountable for the actions that we have taken to safeguard them or the actions we have not taken to safeguard them. I promise you, Mr. President, that this government takes that seriously. And if the police, Barbados Police Service, the Barbados Defense Force, or any of the law enforcement agencies who, you know, the old people used to say, you got a little bit of learning and you think you know all that there is to know. So because you may know a little bit about something, you think you have the whole picture. I trust that they have the whole picture. I trust that they see things on any given day that I have not seen in my lifetime. I trust that they see things in ways that I could not contemplate because I don't even imagine that they are real. I trust that they see and hear conversations that they know for without a shadow of a doubt. Had they not intercepted those conversations, there would have been something serious that would have happened in this country, that the same people in our country who are hollering for blue murder, do something, clean up our streets, would then be saying, you can't do it this way, or you can't do that. I have confidence that the police service has asked for a series of measures that are being granted because they have the whole picture. I have confidence that the legal team who has looked at this has drafted a text that, even if not perfect, will then form the basis of a suite of interventions that allow for them to be treated to by the law courts. I have confidence, Mr. President, that the various agencies and associations that now constitute the Social Justice Committee, who have been weighing in on how Barbados needs to respond to issues of crime, that they are committed to making sure that we deliver on what Barbadians are asking for. I have confidence, Mr. President, the social partnership that I have sat in over the last several months in about 3, maybe 4 meetings. Colleagues, you guys can remind me, 3 or 4 meetings where I have sat in the social partnership on the private sector side in the previous life. Now I sit in the social partnership on the government side in the current life. And sitting in that room, I have seen the biggest room of people that I have ever contemplated could constitute the social partnership. And it is because, Mr. President, the headlines tell us to be inclusive. The commentary tells us, talk and hear from people. Let them tell you what they want to see. You are responsible for fixing it. The government has a higher level of responsibility for intervening. But let us hear from people. So I am happy, Mr. President, to have the ability to sit in a room where I can hear firsthand from the churches, from the social workers, from the community leaders. And they're there, Mr. President, in an attempt to come to a common consensus on matters that any mature society understands must be dealt with collectively. And that's what this government has done, Mr. President. What this legislation today is not about, as we go through the legislation, Mr. President, it has a number of sections. There are 37 sections that I have referred to in the first instance, Mr. President. I've spoken about the warrant provisions as well, which are captured in Part 2. I've spoken about the execution of the interception, which are covered in Part 3, sections 15 through 24, and the destruction of records. I've spoken about that. I've spoken, Mr. President, only briefly about the admissibility of evidence, and I think this is one of the key things that the Honorable Attorney General has stressed. The Attorney General, the government of Barbados, the police service, the judiciary wants to be able to receive the communications and to use them because they have been properly collected as evidence in cases that they are hearing in the judicial sector. But what does that mean, Mr. President? So the police have said, the Honorable Attorney General has said, he has heard on more than one occasion from the police service about communication outside of this legislation, already established, being done from time immemorial. Barbados has not been run by any single political party from independence. And so across all political parties, so it must not be politicized, across all political parties, wireless intercept has been taking place from the beginning of time. But they can't always use it in evidence. So you can imagine, Mr. President, one of the things that Barbadians are also saying, but how come this case went to court and this case got dismissed, Mr. President? How come we can get a conviction? How come them back out on the street? How come them out terrorizing people? What happened to the courts? The courts are a joke. These judges are a joke. The magistrates are a joke. Beijing's ready to carry on, Mr. President. But in some instances, and as we will hear as the day progresses, there are many reasons why the judiciary is being hamstrung and cannot act. One of those things is on the question of evidence. What is admissible as evidence? And does the government want to have the ability to empower the police service to then give to the judicial service the ability to use recordings that have been taken in the interception of communication? And the answer to that is yes. They want to be able to do that so that the people that we as Barbadians say we want off the street can actually be convicted by a court because there's evidence. There's evidence. So the legislation speaks to that in Part 3 in particular, Mr. President, in terms of how we have admissibility of evidence at Section 20. The Independent Monitoring Commission I've spoken about already, that is captured at Part 4, Sections 25 through 34, and then there are a series of miscellaneous provisions at Part 5, and then there are the two schedules that I have already gone through. The first schedule, which would list the offenses, and I've already spoken about the Independent Monitoring Commission. So I have attempted, Mr. President, to go through the legislation in a way that allows you and everyone under the sound of my voice to hear why. I started out by saying what Barbadians are saying, all of them, including members of political parties other than the Barbados Labour Party. I started out by saying what the government has started to do and has done. I started out also by saying, Mr. President, why the government is doing these things. I started out also by saying, Mr. President, that it is important that we take a mature and a sober approach to interventions relating to crime. We want a problem solved. Let us come together and agree on implementing the solutions asked for by the professionals. Let it not be that our conversations are driven by cheap political points, grandstanding, misinformation. Mr. President, it is amusing to me, I must tell you, it's amusing to me to see people parading up and down the street protesting. Protesting, we want back our freedoms. Democracy is under threat, but you are protesting in an act of democracy, an act of freedom. Nobody has kept you from being on the road. Nobody has stopped you from spewing misinformation on your platforms as much as you like. No one has interfered with you. You can tell as much untruths, half-truths, mistruths on your platforms as you like. No one has interfered with you. The record has been attempted to be corrected, yes, but you could do it as many times as you like. No one interferes with you. Nobody has shut down anybody's social media platforms. Nobody has attempted to muzzle you. Anytime you apply for a permit to launch a march and be up and down the street with microphones, including with people who should know better, the police receive the application, and the only consideration that the police have ever given is if it is going to be coinciding with the ability of the police to protect you, not anything else. And there are no circumstances where people have been complaining they didn't get permission. They may not get permission on one day, but they always get permission. And so they march. But as they are marching and protesting, they are complaining about the absence of democracy. But how? The absence of freedom. But how? You are exercising those very freedoms. You know what the absence of democracy looks like in countries outside of Barbados? These people ain't serious. In some of the same countries that we come from across the Caribbean, Mr. President, this legislation on intersect has been in effect for years. For years, and it's being used. So let us not reduce our national conversation to foolishness. Let us not. This bill is before this honorable chamber, Mr. President. I made, in collaboration with the members of the government side, the attempt to invite, and I want to thank all honorable senators for making the effort to be here. I know everyone wasn't able to be here. I know everybody has commitments, but we did have a strong turnout from the members of the Senate yesterday to have an opportunity to engage with the Attorney General and the Minister of Home Affairs, who at times acts as the Attorney General. I want to thank them for taking the time to engage with all of the honorable senators who we made the time to invite. It must not be politicized, because this affects all of us. I want to thank also the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel for making sure that the amendments were here with us this morning and that we had the ability to see what the amendments were and that they're being circulated to everybody and everyone can see that, because that is how this government leads. Collaboratively, inclusively, openly, transparently. We listen if there is a change that needs to be made. There are some of you in this honorable chamber who made changes or who made recommendations or who raised concerns about specific elements in the legislation. We listened. There's one member, Mr. President, that I will speak of a little later on, who had specific concerns. We made sure that they had the opportunity to speak to the leads on these matters, and changes have been heard and received and made. Mr. President, that is how this government leads. Anyone has had the ability to come and raise any concerns. But if you want to shout from the mountaintop, if you want to engage in an exercise of rabble-rousing, if you want to get into confrontation and conflict, that's the very thing, Mr. President, that we say has been the foundation of criminal activity, not knowing how to communicate effectively, not knowing how to collaborate, not knowing how to solve differences without being disagreeable, not knowing how to resolve conflict. That's not what this government does, Mr. President. And so we have taken a collaborative approach, a consultative approach, an inclusive approach, and we have made it available for everyone and anyone to comment and to share their recommendations. And I appreciate all of you for taking those opportunities and using them, because you understand that this is about Barbados, and at the end of the day, Barbadians are looking to the government to take responsibility for cleaning up our streets. I don't want to be the one that stands in the way of the police service being able to clean up our streets as Barbadians have asked. Today, there will be that conversation, and we will have the ability for all of us to record our votes and our voices to say we stand in solidarity with Barbadians. We want to be able to see the changes. We have had an opportunity to share any inputs that we have wanted to share. The door remains open to continue to share any changes after the and the Attorney General has had an opportunity to go through the legislation, that remains the case. But what we will not do is to be paralyzed and afraid to govern because of constant dissent. Because what we have seen is that there is a group, or there are a few groups, who will never do anything but dissent. And so if you accept that you can't please them, you attempt to please the majority, work with the majority, the willing coalition, willing Barbadians. And if you know that you can't win with that particular group, you know that they will never come to the table and be collaborative, consultative, inclusive, then that is a matter, Mr. President, that we have no control over, but the doors have remained open. And they remain open to this day. And so, Mr. President, I want to save some stuff for a little later on. And with these few words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to this debate on a piece of legislation that has caught the attention of many Barbadians from the time it was introduced, and we, the minister who led off the debate, discussed the level of discontent which many Barbadians have towards this piece of legislation. So it is my intention today to put a case and to be very careful in the way how we go through, because I see this piece of legislation as a very weighty piece of legislation which impacts upon all Barbadians and impacts on the freedoms and the privilege which many Barbadians enjoy. And I want to couch this in terms of, yes, Barbadians are concerned and have been concerned for a number of years with the escalating crime situation. And it is true, because the Democratic Labour Party has oftentimes asked the government to do more to address the crime situation in this country. But we are of the opinion that just throwing legislation at crime is not at all the solution to fighting crime in this country. And in particular, this piece of legislation, the way how it is drafted, the way how it is crafted, and the way how it is being foisted upon the people of this country will go down just like the TINT legislation as being rather ineffective in terms of combating crime in this country. Now, the leader of government business tried to make it seem as though the government has just walked down the road of Damascus and recognized that, yes, crime in this country is escalating, and we, beyond anybody else in this country, are doing all that we must, all that we can in order to remedy the situation. But unfortunately, those words do not necessarily sit well with the people of Barbados, because it is the opinion of many Barbadians that the government is not doing enough. The horse has already galloped out through the stable doors, and the government seems to be complicit in terms of how crime has been escalating in this country and not doing enough. And I would want to suggest that if the government believes that bringing legislation that will fix crime, one piece of legislation which they could have brought here today with the haste in which they introduced the interception of communications legislation would have been anti-gang legislation, which for many Barbadians would drive a stroke in terms of fighting crime in this country, and Barbadians would have the realization, look, this government means business. But unfortunately today, we do not believe that you mean business with this legislation in terms of the way how it is drafted and also the many incidents that go around with this legislation. Mr. President, I think that in looking at this legislation, before we actually get to the various clauses, we need to remember that Barbados has a history with wiretapping. And I believe that that is part of the reason why many Barbadians are uncomfortable with this piece of legislation. And I know that the Barbados Labour Party would have Barbadians believe that governance in Barbados only started in 2018 onward, but we have a history. We do have a past. And I would like to walk Barbadians back to the days of 2013, where information broke in this country surrounding wiretapping. And I believe that that is the reason why many Barbadians are uncomfortable with this piece of legislation. And for that reason why there has been so much hostility towards this piece of legislation. It is not that the Democratic Labour Party would not support wiretapping legislation in the interest of fighting crime in Barbados. We have made that abundantly clear that we will support wiretapping legislation once the legislation is properly drafted. And we also made provisions that it should be a judge who issues the warrant for the legislation. But what is also of importance for the Democratic Labour Party and the people of Barbados is that the wiretapping is used for surveillance on the criminal element and not the private individuals and not for political purposes. That is the main contention which Barbadians have with this piece of legislation, and with all of the fancy words by the leader of government business, I do not think that they have addressed the fears which Barbados have with this legislation, because they have not addressed what happened in the past. And I am not calling anything out of the air, because it was mentioned in the other place by both the Attorney General and the Minister for Information that wiretapping has been happening in this country for over 10 years or more. But yet still we now bring in the legislation today, Mr. President. And that is an issue for Barbadians. That is the issue that Barbadians have. And if, Mr. President, this government was serious and wanted to come to Barbados on the platform of transparency which they campaign on and openness, they will come to Barbadians with clean hands and declare the players in the past who were involved in that wiretapping which the Attorney General spoke about happened for more than 10 years, and the Minister of Information reiterated that it has been happening for more than 10 years. They will come to Barbadians with clean hands and declare the roles of the persons who were involved, and also let Barbadians know if any of those persons who were involved before will have any major role to play in this legislation if it is passed in this chamber. But I can't say if it is passed in this chamber that it will become law, because the Prevention of Corruption was passed years ago, and up to now it has not become law, because it has not been proclaimed. But if it is proclaimed and becomes law in this country, will any of the players who were involved in the matter that broke in the public domain in 2013 have any dealing with this matter now? And will they be functionaries that can make any decision in terms of interfering with this? These are the things, Mr. President, that the people of Barbados are concerned about. And that is the reason why they have so much hostility towards this piece of legislation and are not in the mind to support this government and some of the same players that were involved in 2013 being involved in this legislation. Mr. President, I want to take this chamber back, because it is important as a legislator, because I'm here today as a legislator, not as no constitutional lawyer, not even as a drafter from Parliamentary Council. Those are persons that have a responsibility to inform us, the legislators, of what we are doing here today. And Mr. President, I would also say that throughout the origins of this legislation and the introduction in the other place and here, one of the major findings was the government has not availed itself to enough consultation public, open consultation on this matter. Because I will recall that when it was introduced in the other place, just after crop over, at a time when many Barbadians are more interested in fun and frolic and hardly pick out a newspaper to read and will not be interested in the heavy content of debate in the lower house, that this was introduced as legislation and brought in such a way that you could easily miss it. And I was further informed that the Bar Association at that time had not been consulted and given an opportunity to give an opinion on this piece of legislation before it was introduced into the House. If I am wrong, I would allow the leader of government business to come and to correct me, and I will stand corrected. But it was my understanding that the bar was not given an opportunity to consult on this, and if at least one element, the criminal bar, this legislation should have gone to the criminal bar for adequate consultation and for consultation. But yet still, the leader of government business will try to give you the impression that they underwent an after-the-fact consultation process with the social partnership. I would like for the leader of government business to tell us, how did that consultation go? Did the persons who were invited to the consultation have beforehand access to the legislation and enough time to go through it and seek other opinion to bring back to the consultation process? So I'm asking the leader of the government business, or was the information put up on a screen and some technocrat or possibly another member from the government side in the social partnership went through the process with the individuals there? Mr. President, I would like to inform the government and the leader of government business in the Senate that that does not constitute consultation. That constitutes you talking down to people and trying to put information into people's head. But adequate consultation would have allowed the members of the social partnership enough time to go over the information in this legislation, seek advice from professionals who may know, and come to the social partnership with questions, with recommendations, so that they can add to the process. So can the leader of government business explain to the chamber how the consultation process took place at the level of the social partnership? Furthermore, a bill such as this, which is so weighty, and this government has campaigned on a platform of transparency and have set up a number of joint select committees for the purpose of doing what should have been done with this bill. And I am saying that this bill should have gone to the Joint Select Standing Committee of Governance and Policy Matters, and I would further recommend that instead of us rushing through to pass this legislation today, that we refer this bill to that committee for wider consultation, because it contains a number of issues that Barbadians are not happy with, and it contains a number of issues which need to be addressed, and we can benefit from the expertise of technocrats who are familiar with this legislation and how it operates. And as the leader of government business said, the legislation was around and operating, Mr. President, for a long time within this jurisdiction. So they can invite experts from Jamaica who implemented the legislation in 2002 to speak to the members of the committee and the wider parliamentary group so as to make us more comfortable with the implementation and the working of the legislation. Because it is one thing to have the legislation on paper, but it's another thing on how you would actually implement it and how it would work, which I believe that that is the reason that the government is using the justification for not proclaiming the Prevention of Corruption bill, because they claim that you don't have the people who would actually monitor or work within the agency, and the difficulty of finding the agency. Do we have the experts that would actually be able to operate and work within the Independent Monitoring Commission or authority, whatever it is. All of these things, all of these changes, these are things that we need to consider. Mr. President, I would even go further as to why this bill requires larger consultation before the Joint Select Committee and allow persons to come in and give advice to the parliamentarians before it is rushed through Parliament. This is a very technical area. We all speak about wiretapping, and there's a section of the bill which says you have to go through the telecommunication service providers. But we don't know what technology is being utilized and whether or not that technology even requires the collaboration or the interference of the telecommunication service providers to get what needs to be done. And all of these are things that we need to be more aware of. So we cannot make any informed decision as to whether or not the Independent Monitoring Commission would actually be able to carry out their functions effectively, because they may think that they need to get a report from the telecommunications provider to get XYZ information, but the person who may be operating the technology already has it there, don't even need to go through, look at, or communicate, or in any way have any relationship with the telecommunication provider. So the telecommunication provider might bring you one list of wiretappings or bugging of phones that will be easier for people to understand which was done, but whereas the person who actually operating the equipment may have actually utilized another source in order to gather the information. I think, Mr. President, that all of this information will be made clear because, yes, we don't need to make it all public, but at least you can trust the confidence of those of us who are sworn into these chambers as senators and in the other places as member of parliament that bring that information to the government and policy committee by the technocrats who know how this process will actually work, so that we can make informed decisions as whether or not the intention of the Independent Monitoring Commission as set out in this legislation would be justifiable. So you have Trinidad, Jamaica that you can go to. In 2002, I have the information here too, Mr. President. Jamaica in 2002, Trinidad 2010, Guyana 2008, they're all part of CARICOM, and I'm certain that they will be willing to offer a consultant who is well aware to give us advice and to share information with us as parliamentarians so that we can make informed decisions. And while I'm at it, Mr. President, in terms of returning to these dates, the idea that the government is trying to give that this piece of legislation needs to be rushed through Parliament at this time, the fact that it was available since 2002 in Jamaica tells you that we don't need to rush it through now, because they had the opportunity prior to 2000, they had the opportunity prior to 2008 where they could have implemented it. And Mr. President, I know that you had a very close relationship with the Prime Minister of Barbados at that time in 2008, and I don't know, you may be the best person that will be able to tell us why didn't he introduce that legislation at the time. Also, the person who was the Attorney General for a period of time after 2008 to 2004, Mr. President, I did not mean to draw you into the debate, Mr. President, so you can stay there. But you may know, you may have had a conversation before, but someone who is still functioning and acting, the Attorney General, I believe, up until 2003, 2004, you had the opportunity then that you could have introduced the legislation. Why didn't they make it legal at that time? And Mr. President, I go back to the fact once bitten, twice shy. Because of what was exposed in Barbados in 2013, I believe that even the politicians, the functionaries at that time over the two parliamentary periods up to 2008, which would have been the Barbados Labour Party, and after 2008, the Democratic Labour Party, once bitten, twice shy, and possibly felt afraid, just like the rest of Barbadians, to put this power into the hands of certain people. And we need to make it clear to Barbadians what caused that fear. What caused that fear back in 2013? Mr. President, it was reported widely all across Barbados that a high-level individual at the head of our policing and service protection agency was sent on administrative leave. And it was alleged that the information that was all across Barbados, and many Barbadians know this, Mr. President, so it's not tales out of school, because it was broadcasted, it was in the media, it was the substance of court documents, that this individual was sent on administrative leave because of wiretapping. And the Police Service Commission at the time thought that it was a rather troubling occurrence. Described it as dangerous and untenable, bugging phones of several Barbadian citizens who were not known or suspected to be individuals in any criminal activities. This happened in Barbados, Mr. President, and this is the reason why Barbadians are uncomfortable with this piece of legislation. It's not that we do not want to fight crime, but the leader of government
Mr. President, I here to interrupt. On a point of order, Mr. President.
Yes, what's the point of order?
The document for which the Honourable Senator has referred it says to be the report of the Commission. And as far as I'm aware, that report with the details he cited has not been made public. I say that because the very court case in which the gentleman who brought and sued the state, he was represented by the leader of the opposition in that case, and the taxpayers had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to him in damages. He's making an allegation against a citizen of Barbados in a very dangerous way, an allegation that has not been proven in any court. And in any event, that citizen won his case against the state. It is misleading the chamber. It is a dangerous thing to do. The report has never been published in public. The allegations have never been determined as factual in a court of law.
Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will continue. The information which was made public, it said that law-abiding citizens were afraid to use their telephones, Mr. President. This is something which happened.
Sorry, and the information you speak about that was made public, this is what are you quoting? I'm referring to newspaper articles. I'm not necessarily referring to newspaper articles, but I am referring to I know
that we don't quote newspaper articles.
So on what I relying for your sure proof that this information was published when and by whom? You said the information was published. I think you should just stick to your notes and not make reference to documents which you're not able to make documents of the House.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was not referring to any document. I was referring to my notes. And
Mr. President, I raise on a point of order again. The Honourable Senator made reference to a report of the Police Service Commission. He is misleading the chamber. That report does not contain the statements which he is referring to. And if he's referring to a report, he is duty-bound by the rules of this chamber to produce that document to this chamber. Again, there has been no finding of fact by a tribunal or any court of competent jurisdiction that the allegations to which the Honourable Senator is referring to have been found as a finding of fact in a court of law. And I repeat, this gentleman who was the subject of that matter was able to succeed in his case for being sent on the same administrative leave. The leader of the opposition represented him, and the taxpayers of Barbados has had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages.
Senator Worrell, the document that you indicated for the Police Service Commission, you'll need to make that a document to the House, so you need to withdraw the comments and have them struck from the record. All courts must be able to be supported by laying of the documents.
Certainly, Mr. President. There are documents, but I never referred to any report by the Public Service Commission. I never stated a report. I never gave a.
I was listening to you very carefully. You did make reference to the commission, and you did say that the document from the commission stated the matters that you referred to. If you're saying that you don't have the report, then clerks, you have that portion of the presentation struck from the record, as it cannot be supported by the documentation. So you can make your notes, you can make your observations and your inference, but you cannot ascribe to an authority a document that we're not able to quote from.
I'm so guided, Mr. President. And Mr. President, at the end of the day, you cannot change the history of this country and the reality that many Barbadians face. Even if it is a document of the House or not, you cannot change that, because Barbadians know what transpired in that period of time. It was a topical issue, and they know what transpired, Mr. President. And it made persons feel uncomfortable because they believe that law-abiding citizens in this country, Mr. President, that their communications were being intercepted and their phones were being bugged, and it believed that not only politicians, but parliamentarians, persons in business community, and also persons in the legal profession, and even in trade unions, Mr. President, felt uncomfortable when that information broke. And there was more than one case, and they did not call anyone, but I will not continue on that point, because the point has been made, Mr. President, that there is precedent in this country why Barbadians are not comfortable with this administration, the Barbados Labour Party administration, introducing this legislation the way that they did. And even though that they finally accepted that there were errors in it, and even though the leader of government business tried to cry down the persons who marched in protest, that's the right of citizens to march in protest. I would remind you that you got over there because you marched in protest.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
I did not, and I do not, cry down the persons who march. I was very clear that the honourable member not continue to misrepresent my words. I realize that he's fixated on me today, and I appreciate you too, Senator Worrell, but please move on from me.
The Honourable Senator is correct, Senator Worrell. She did not, Senator Cummings did not cry down the marchers. Senator Cummings made the point that their marching was a demonstration that there was, in fact, democracy. She questioned some of the placards that were there concerning the plea for that legislative exercise. I urge you to withdraw those comments and move on.
So I withdraw, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell.
The point is, as a result of those marches, Mr. President, the government had to concede that they would need to amend the legislation by removing the section that they had issues with, which is section 5(2)(b), which the government came to this chamber today indicating that it will be amended and removed from the legislation. So thankfully, Mr. President, that those persons were allowed to go out there and march. But Mr. President, there are other areas of this legislation that need further scrutiny. And I again go back to my point, the substantial point, that this legislation is not fit for purpose and worthy of being passed in this chamber and should be sent to the Joint Select Committee of Governance and Policy for further review. Mr. President, when you go through the legislation, you have a number of inconsistencies in the legislation which do not necessarily fall in line with what happens in other jurisdictions. I know that, for instance, section you are entering the premises. 13. Yeah. Section 8, the scope of the warrant. 3, 3, a warrant may authorize entry of any premises specified in the warrant for the purpose of installing, maintaining, using, or recovering any equipment used to intercept communication specified in the warrant. Mr. President, this will need some explanation to the people of Barbados, and in terms that will be impacted by this legislation. Mr. There is a need for further interpretation, for further discussion on this legislation. For instance, Mr. President, on the section 2, 13 gives judges the option to request a progress report. Again, I say that we do not have in our position enough information to determine whether or not the monitoring committee is completely able to actually perform their functions. You have a recommendation of 120 days for a progress report, where in other jurisdictions, it is 90 days in Jamaica, 90 days in Trinidad, 90 days in Guyana, and in other jurisdictions, it's far less than that, 60 days. So why do we need 120 days to do something that other places would do in 90 days, Mr. President? All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Then there is, in section 4.1, requires the authorized officer to submit a final report to the judge, 14.1, and to implement and to the Independent Monitoring Commission as soon as practicable. What does that really mean? Does it mean 120 days? Does it mean 3 years? Because you can get extensions in terms of the warrant, but I think that it may be better if it is positioned that you provide interim reports, because you need to know what information is being collected, and this is a period of time where people are very concerned about their privacy, which is a point the leader of government business made, where Barbadians, to elevate the right to interfere with the right of privacy everywhere you go in the world. Some places you can't even open magazines without determining how you will deal with the cookies, because people are concerned about their privacy and their data being out there. People actually pay persons to scrub their information off of the internet, but yet we are saying here that we have no right to privacy, and even communication, which is not part of a criminal proceeding, could be out there in the hands of other people. And this government wants Barbadians to believe that this is acceptable, that this is right. But you have a right to privacy, a safeguard in the Constitution for persons that they should have a right to privacy. And we need to have some guarantees from this government that this legislation would not be utilized for means other than policing criminals, and it will not be in the hands of any politicians to manipulate the decisions and the output of this legislation. If, Mr. President, this government was really serious, you have a test case there before us already. You have the matter of 2013 and before, so that we can test how the Independent Monitoring Commission would work. Bring the evidence from that matter of 2013 before what we would put as the Independent Monitoring Commission, so that we would have an idea of what information is collected and how it would work. If you really want to show the government, the people of Barbados, that you've turned a new leaf and that you have walked down, that you have turned a new leaf, Mr. President, and you are a whole new person, washed in white and in the blood of the Lamb and everything, then allow openness and transparency into the matter of 2013. Identify the players, identify the persons whose phones were tapped. The AG and the Minister of Information said it was happening for over 10 years. provide a report of all persons over that period of time whose phones were tapped and what information was connected and what criminal activity they were associated with. These are things that if the government wants Barbadians to believe that they're operating with clean hands, come to Barbadians with the information. And once you come to us and we get an idea of how the Independent Monitoring Committee will work, we will be satisfied. And once we are of the view that persons who may have, the law wasn't in place at that time, so that to break the law, but who made those missteps in the past will have no hand in the matter now, Barbadians will feel comfortable with it. The Democratic Labour Party will support it. But right now, with this piece of legislation, it is not worthy of being supported. And to show the Democratic Labour Party is serious about fighting crime, Mr. President, that we took it upon our responsibility to create a commission on crime which presented a report around the 1st of August, a blueprint to rescue a nation. And I'm willing to make this a document of the House for the likes of Senator Nichols and also Senator Walker as well, to show that the Democratic Labour Party is serious about fighting crime. So we are not in here today to pick a fight or to pick a noise. We are here today doing our constitutional right as the opposition party to give advice to the government in situations where we believe that the legislation which they are bringing to the country have contained deficits and contain areas which need to be adjusted. So, Mr. President, I am saying to this chamber and to the government, heed a little advice. Get back to the days when you were rubbing shoulders with the people of Barbados. Do not march too hastily along and believe that because you have 29 seats, no 29 seats in the other place, and that you have all of the vote, the overwhelming majority in this place to pass this legislation, that you must rush ahead to do what you want, because it is only the government of Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party government, that know what is best. Listen to the people of Barbados. Do not allow that arrogance to cloud your judgment. Barbadians have spoken out with good reason, not because they do not want to fight crime, because Barbadians are generally law-abiding citizens. But we do not need a government creating what Barbadians see as a police state, bringing legislation which will criminalize Barbadians. You have it with the Tint legislation. The Tint will not solve crime in this country when the persons who are conducting the crime are on foot or on motorcycle. The Tint will not bring anything to this. This intersection of communication bill, if the agents operating it spend more time trying to intercept the communication of law-abiding citizens as opposed to the actual criminals, it will do nothing to change the face of crime in Barbados. If this government wanted Barbadians to believe that they were serious about their fight against crime, they would have introduced anti-gang legislation. And if that legislation had met all of the checks and balances, the Democratic Labour Party in opposition would gladly support it. If this government was serious in terms of fighting crime, there are a whole slew of measures which could be introduced in terms of finding useful activities for our young people, maybe putting the BDS sports program back in place, because every aspect of fighting crime does not have to be, every aspect of crime does not have to end up in the law court. You can have the soft approach as well. So maybe why have this government come in the other place with for a subvention for the BDF to reopen the BDF sports program, or to expand the capacity in the Barbados Youth Development Council, which you now call the Youth Advanced Corps, so that from September, that more young people will be taken off of the streets of Barbados to get involved. Because when you hear, Mr. President, the age range of the persons in Barbados who are being charged for the criminal activities, 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, persons 21, and you want to tell me that this government would want to give you the impression that they're fighting crime, but none of these soft measures which are within their purview, they have not rushed the legislation into the House with. They have not rushed to the House with this legislation, but they will rush to the House with this piece of legislation today, Mr. President, which will not fight crime in this country, which most Barbadians believe is geared towards political motive and a political agenda, Mr. President. So do not bring the argument today that you are finally realize that crime in this country is out of hand, because you have not done a number of the soft measures that would actually show that you are serious about crime. This legislation was available since 2002. We didn't introduce it then. So to wait an additional 3 months or so to put it on the proper review and bring a proper working legislation for the people of Barbados, we would not have lost any ground. We would not have lost any ground. And in that period of time, perhaps you can come back to this chamber with some of the soft legislation that would help to turn some Barbadians to possible life of crime. Bring a subvention for the BDF so that they can restart the sports program. Bring a subvention for the youth advanced course so that they can increase or double their intake for September. Bring a subvention that more of the young people who are being put out of school at 16 would have a place to go and to remain in a proper education system. These are things that a government with a majority can easily do, because all it takes is a caring government operating in the interest of the people of Barbados to implement these measures. But no, you want to come to us today to police law-abiding citizens with this piece of legislation which would intrude on their private lives and which many people believe will not be used and geared towards criminals. Anti-gang legislation will be geared and used towards criminals. But this government has taken a focus of criminalizing Barbadians for their simple actions of living their lives and now want to encroach on their privacy and want to wrap it up to make Barbadians believe that you are doing something about crime. Mr. President, if this government is listening any longer, if this government cares or still want people to believe that they care, they will suspend consideration of this bill and refer this legislation to the Committee of Governance and Policy Matters to allow a wider consultation on this legislation. It does not make sense bringing to the House pieces of legislation which will not work and which will be ineffective. It is better to craft a piece of legislation that the people of Barbados are satisfied to work with. And I reiterate, the Democratic Labour Party is willing to accept and work with wiretapping legislation once it does not encroach on private citizens, but it is focused on the criminals, and once it has the appropriate checks and balances in place where warrants are required from the judiciary, and there's a proper monitoring procedure in place to make sure that any information which is taken out, which is intercepted, is appropriately destroyed and does not get into the appropriate hands. We can also look at how the commission is set up, Mr. President. When you come to a member from civil society, what is that? Who is that? Who is the political operative that the government already has planned to put there? I do agree, and I'm glad that they made the decision to remove the minister and place it under the direction of the president. But in what capacity will the president be operating on? I do agree with that. I do agree with the proposal that one of the commissioners should be a retired judge, but there are other positions that could have been included there as well. What about the data protection commissioner? Couldn't that be been included? What about a retired police officer at a certain gazetted rank, or someone from the BDF at a certain gazetted rank? They could have been included, but don't just leave a wide open door for a member of civil society who could be anybody that does not have the capacity to actually function in the area. Perhaps we can leave a member of the clergy to look out for the interests, the general interest, but not just a senior member of the clergy. And a non-political one as well. But when we leave it open there to judgment, a member of civil society, the answer of this is that we do not want any political interference in this bill. This is a matter for the judiciary. This is a matter for the legal system. So we need to have clear definitions of the individuals who will make up that position on the commission, Mr. President. And there's a lot more, but Mr. President, I would hope that the government would listen to reason and don't force through with a heavy hand as though it is an authoritarian state. We appreciate democracy in Barbados. We appreciate the people of Barbados being able to have input. This government campaign on transparency and openness and giving Barbadians that opportunity to make that input, and that's what they're asking for. So if you open this up to wider consultation by sending it to the committee, Barbadians would agree with this. So I'm asking, Mr. President, that we pause consideration of this bill and that it be sent to the committee, Mr. President, because it is not fit for purpose and it is not ready to be made law in this country today. And the process of amending legislation on the floor is very untidy, especially weighty pieces of legislation like this, Mr. President. With those few words, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. Are there any other speakers? Senator Malou.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. President. Sir, I come to this chamber always prepared to speak. Some matters are more weighty than others. Today, this is quite a weighty matter. And let me start by saying that this seems to be the debate in the public sector seems to be about privacy. So I would make my comments with regards to privacy and how this particular piece of legislation, how I think it affects privacy. But before I get there, it seems to me that whenever we have a matter that we want to debate about being, let's try and do better, it always seems to come down to some argument over the difficulty with doing better. I have said in this chamber before that, we like to talk about Singapore as a model, the same size as us and how long it's been around and where we could have been. So what I often do is, since people like to say that, Mr. President, I often go and compare what they do over there with what we do here. Well, my advice to those who don't like this law is don't read the one from Singapore. Because when you want an orderly society, it comes at a price. And when you are in the situation that we are in today, and I don't need to paint a burning platform for anyone here. There's a burning platform, and we read in the paper, I think it's 34 murders already for the year. We have to do something, sir. And I look at it from my position in the business community, let's say, and I say, at what point is this really going to be so bad that we can't live with it? It's one thing to talk about it's down in, or it's just in that area, or it's just in that area, or that's amongst some drug fellas or whatever it might be. But that is not the situation today, sir. I had 6 criteria which I thought I would look at as, when you really know you've got to act on this matter. Number 1, citizens don't feel safe. I think if we took a poll today amongst everyone in Barbados and asked them, do you feel as safe today as you did a year ago? I don't think that we would get one yes. Whether it was in the heights or in the trenches, nobody don't feel safe today. We are not as safe as we used to be. Citizens don't, I can tell you my own experience with my children going out this year with Kadooment and so on. I was asking them more and more, which party that is, you know, come straight home, be careful. I was extremely worried. As a parent, as Barbadians, we are worried. So I don't need to paint the burning platform. The next thing I look at with this crime is the economy is going to be harmed. Again, I don't need to tell you all. It is being harmed. That horse has left the barn, as they say. Tourism is going to be affected. I've seen it. It's being affected. Brain drain. I've spoken about this before. When you get to this point with crime, I worry about it. Again, I've said this before in my own way. I worry that my children are not going to choose Barbados. So there's one thing to think, oh, brain drain. It's people leaving Barbados, adults who are leaving here and choosing somewhere else. That's not necessarily what I'm focused on. I'm asking, do our young people see Barbados as their future? Or are they leaving? And part of that is how they see crime. Do they feel safe? Can they move around in this country? Foreign direct investment is affected by it substantially. That question is being asked. Whereas a few years ago, there was questions, oh, well, man, you got a prime minister who has a big footprint on the world stage. Yes, Barbados, let's invest. Today, the first question I'm being asked about is crime, sir. So there's no need to be a burning platform. It exists today. You have to do something about it. And then starts the next part of it, which is even worse, is the loss of confidence in the rule of law. People are questioning whether or not, when a crime does happen, what actually, you know, what's actually going to happen here? What's going to happen about it? And perhaps this bill today is addressing some part of that. So, sir, when it's, as I said earlier, this bill, a lot of people focus on it, they talk about it being privacy. I have spoken about this before, Mr. President, and I spoke about, there was a great quote, right, it's attributed to Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., I think was a Supreme Court Justice in the US, and he referred to, and the quote goes, "Your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins." And I wonder if I couldn't adapt that and say to you that your right to privacy protects lawful personal choices and communications, but it does not protect criminal conduct. It does not shield you. Your right to privacy does not shield you from criminal conduct. So once a person takes steps to commit or facilitate an illegal act, their expectation of privacy can and should be lawfully curtailed, subject to due process. I'm going to let the lawyers debate whether or not there's enough due process in here. From a layman's point of view, what I've seen is you've got to go to the judge, you've got to follow a certain process, there is an oversight body, there's various things. The other thing that I saw in this law is that it kind of specifies, not kind of, it does specify in Schedule Number 1, these things that the only time you can use it. And sir, am I going to vote against this piece of legislation when it says that your right to privacy is curtailed if you are planning to commit murder? Is that what you want me to vote against, sir? Is that what I am hearing? Is what I'm reading about? Treason, terrorism, trafficking in persons, kidnapping or abduction, anti-money laundering, money laundering. I don't need to read all these other things to do with drugs and arms and etc. We all agree that those are serious acts. I do not know what all of the ones are that are 10 years or more, but they must be very, very serious acts, sir, to carry a sentence of 10 years or more. So it seems to me that if you believe the statement that I made earlier, that your right to privacy protects your personal choices and communications, but it does not shield your criminal conduct, as soon as you enter into the area that you are going to plan or you have done criminal conduct, your right to privacy is ended, as far as I am concerned. And again, subject to the due process, which much more smarter people than me will talk about from terms of the legal side of it. So, sir, This particular law, my personal feeling is, it hasn't gone far enough. Could go further, because we have a serious burning platform in this island. We have a threat to our existence as a country when you look at all of these different things. We're going to lose our young people who don't see this as a future. We're going to lose foreign direct investment. You're not going to have tourism. People are not going to feel safe in their homes. Your prisons are going to balloon, and all kinds of other people are going to take over this country that is our beautiful country. So if this is the tools, if these are the tools that our police force needs, if these are the tools that the Attorney General, etc., need to get this done, I shall not be standing in their way, sir. That is my position. However, I will listen very carefully to the lawyers around the table with regards to the due process and that part of the legislation. I will listen carefully to it. But the fundamental premises of what is in here has my complete support. Just for the record, I did, and I'll use a couple more minutes of my time to say that I did compare what others have done in Bermuda, and Cayman Islands, as I mentioned in Singapore. I really and truly, we could go further. We could have gone further. This is not a bridge too far from me. And as a law-abiding citizen, Mr. President, I am not concerned that you're going to come and listen to me. Because when I look at the list of things in Schedule 1, I don't have any plans for them as of today. But if I do, and you hear about it, protect me from myself, please. With those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Malou. Senator Tring.
Mr. President, today I rise for the first time to make a presentation to this honorable chamber, quite aware of the weight of this moment. I rise, Mr. President, it being no secret that I have spent the majority of my 30 years in service-oriented organizations, and I have credited several times publicly the impact of those organizations on my life. Indeed, those organizations have informed in a major way the way that I participate and the way that I engage in democracy and the way that I encourage my peers and other young people to do so. And in doing so, one of my concerns within the public discourse is that oftentimes it appears that we believe that governance is tidy, that governance is often wrapped in a neat bow to perfection, and that is not the case. And part of the gift of democracy is that we are allowed to amend. We are allowed to voice our concerns. We are allowed to recognize when we have erred, when we have made missteps, and we are allowed to correct those. And so I stand today supporting the bill before us, happy to do so when we recognize that based on feedback, based on concerns, that we can amend and that the government is not does not know it all and will not always get it right. And so we often opt to collaborate and consult, even when those that should consult opt out of governance and consulting. I also want to say that the ability to amend and the willingness to amend legislation is a duty of a responsible and responsive government. And so I agree with Senator Malou that it is important that we recognize that our rights and freedoms are not infinite, that they do not exist without boundaries, and that we have to be able to balance those with the collective needs and the collective good of any society. And so I stand here also today as a member of the very generation that seems to be in the center of a war that we did not create, but we oftentimes find ourselves in the headlines. It is inarguable that the collective patience and the strength of our institutions is being tested by criminal forces. It is inarguable that it is heartbreaking to see that the face of both victims and perpetrators of crimes are overwhelmingly young, while many have not lost the other features. Moreover, These are the same young men, and I say young men because we predominantly see young men, should be building businesses and raising families, but we are saying rest in peace, and they're often buried in Westbury or locked away in Dodds. Mr. President, this debate is about a legislation that adds to the arsenal of tools that we have, an arsenal that the government has been building since 2018, an arsenal that seeks to modernize our tools of justice because we are no longer dealing with criminals who are writing letters to pen pals. We are talking about persons who are threatening witnesses, who then fear for their lives. We are talking about updating our legislation so that we can match the new age of criminals that we are dealing with, and also strengthening the ability of law enforcement to be proactive and not simply trying to catch criminals after a crime has been committed, as well as seeking to hold law enforcement accountable for their actions. Mr. President, it would be disingenuous, and so I agree with Senator Andre World, because the government has recognized this since 2018, that we cannot legislate and police our way out of crime and violence, and that social development and indeed the development of young people in this country requires a slate of actions that not only speak to the judiciary, but that also deal with other things. It would be disingenuous to suggest that this bill alone, or the 10th bill, will get rid of crime. Well, that's not a secret. We know this. Additionally, the truth is that we know that crime is a breakdown in the social fabric of our societies. And so we have to give, and we have been given, a response on several fronts: economic empowerment and opportunities, judicial responses, social investment, international cooperation, families and building families, and other methods of socializing reforms. These have to work together to address the challenges that we are having. If we are honest with ourselves, the criminals that we are dealing with are not the criminals of 20 years ago. They're not even the criminals of 10 years ago. These are criminals that recognize that times have changed. They are using tools and technology that is up to date with the 21st century and indeed 2025. And so crime is organized differently, and the way that it preys on our young people has also changed as young people like myself navigate an increasingly complex world. Criminal organizations are not ragtag groups, better connected, better financed. Those that are in Jamaica could engage with us here in Barbados. No matter where in the world you are, where globalization is not only for governments, but the criminals using it too. And so they are more sophisticated in how they recruit. We think it only happens on the blocks. That is not the case. And so how they traffic and how they intimidate has also changed. Guns are now trafficked in parts and assembled, making it more difficult to catch. Information spreads fast, and we know that in this honorable chamber when we look at social media, then the truth can even catch up. Violence is filmed and shared and consumed in real time, and it magnifies its impact. These are not secrets. This is a reality. And so our young people are coming of age in this generation. We are a modern generation, growing up in a world that is overwhelming and interconnected. News is instantaneous. Opinions are spread with the tap of a screen. Frustrations build loudly and quickly. The lure of immediate gratification, whether through likes, money, or notoriety, has never been stronger. And so too often, crime and violence present themselves as quick answers in a world where opportunities sometimes feel very slow to come. Mr. President, I'm not saying this at all to condemn my generation, because I believe in my generation. I say this to remind us that young people are navigating pressures that many generations, and no generation indeed before them, has faced. Social media amplifies ambition and anger. I like X, formerly known as Twitter. And so if you are there, you understand the frustration of young people. The gig economy has reshaped how we view work and worth. Cultural shifts are occurring. Some of the old norms that our parents and grandparents enjoyed and grounded and rooted themselves in are no longer there. And so oftentimes as young people, we can feel unmoored, pulled in multiple directions. And so we search for belonging and meaning. In this environment, gangs or fast money is not born out of evil, it is born out of vulnerability, out of a yearning for identity, and out of the most basic human need to be seen, to be valued, and to be part of something. And so when this government speaks, and I think oftentimes somewhere in the political theater it becomes difficult to keep up with what is actually happening. So I wish to share that today. When this government speaks, we are talking about responding to crime. We do not only talk about punishment, we talk about understanding as well. We talk about building systems that meet young people where they are. We talk about making sure that they have pathways to growth so that they know that their future is not bound by the limitations of their present. Mr. President, I know this very well. I come from parents who migrated to Barbados from Guyana. I've been here since I was 2 years old. Mr. President, I understand what it means for people to ask who you belong to and you don't got an answer that satisfies them, because we know the first thing Bajans like to ask is who you belong to. And my surname is Trim, so that's always a question. I understand what it means to have a mother who is a housekeeper and a father who is a laborer. I understand what it means when people try to define you by the boundaries of the communities that you come from. I understand intimately what it feels to do your best to change your environment, like I was doing when I was at university, when the tuition was stopped. I understand what it means when it feels easier to give up and to give way to despair, Mr. President. And so I say today that my generation is not lost, but we are simply living in a different world, and it requires us to respond with tools fit for the times in which we live, and this bill does exactly that. Mr. President, our young people are not faceless statistics, and this government understands that. We see them as students, or athletes, or entrepreneurs, or volunteers, or sons and daughters. And so this government, which is serious about crime, has been equally serious about widening the doors of opportunity. And so we are building a society that is trying to make it easier for young people to pick up skills than a gun, for young people to access capital to a business than surrender to despair, and for athletes to travel to represent their country rather than be lured by gangs. And I continue to say that we have done that since 2018. Pairing legislation with strong social interventions in youth development and in social development and indeed in social welfare. And while critics may question whether that vision is realized, I say to you to look around. We are seeing the reality being built step by step, program by program. But there is no silver bullet. There is no magical cure. There is no abracadabra moment. This is not a magic trick. This is reality and society that we are dealing with. And so when we look at the Youth Advanced Corps, young Barbadians have been receiving training, mentorship, and discipline in service. When we look at the Barbados Trust Loans Fund, young entrepreneurs with ideas but no collateral have been given a fighting chance to turn ambition into business, and in some cases into employment for others, so that they can help their peers and indeed other Barbadians to progress. The Building Blocks program and Project Dawn have taken neighborhoods that some have written off, some that young people that some have counted out, and turned them into proof that when governments invest in communities, hope grows where hopelessness once stood. And Mr. President, our investments have not been limited to one sector. It has stretched across education, creativity, family life, innovation, technology. We could talk about the Prime Minister's Cup that provides an opportunity for young men to play semi-professional football, because young men from working class communities deserve to be able to not only scrimmage on Sundays or when they have free time, but to earn a living in competition. We can also talk about the Thousand Families program that is tackling intergenerational poverty at its roots, because we should not wonder whether a child's future should be determined by where they come from. It should not matter where you come from, and this government wants to make sure that it does not. We have continued to retool education on technical and vocational training. We have expanded opportunities in the creative industries, and we intend to continue doing so. On Carry Festa, we will see some of our best, brightest, and most talented on display. Matter of fact, recently we had a launch of a video by a regional artist and two international artists that was choreographed by a Bajan. She is not the first, and she definitely will not be the last, because we understand that investment in the creative industries matters. And through the National Transformation Initiative, tens of thousands of Bajans have access to world-class education from world-class institutions free of cost. Does this sound like we are only focusing on the hard issues? We have outlined education transformation. We have outlined an educational program and an educational reform that will bring us into the 21st century, that will align us with best practices. We have invested in technology. We are exposing our young people to being able to not only consume technology, but to be able to create technology. But Mr. President, it is important to also be candid that social programs, and like I said, there is no abracadabra, that it takes years for impact to be seen. And so we have to offer the police tools to do their jobs now. And in the meantime, there are some that will argue that investments like these are not working, that they are useless, that the laws ain't fixing crime immediately. I reject that argument completely. It is like taking medication, and because you don't wake up automatically cured, you stop taking it. That is not how it works. Because if we neglect social programs today, and I found it interesting the mention of investment in social programs, because I was involved in the Barbados Youth Development Council when our funding was cut by the then government. That funding that supported youth organizations, that the Democratic Labour Party government, should I add, that funding that supported community work, that funding that allowed for us to reach into communities and engage with youth groups that were doing the hard work, the grunt work. And I dare say that youth organizations and civil society organizations will run programs and run good programs at a fraction of the cost, because we show up not because we have to, and we show up not because we demand to, but because we want to, and we give of it selflessly. And so, Mr. President, today as I stand here, I want to say that when we neglect social programs today, when we discard them because we do not feel like they are an automatic cure, what we do is that we see the results and the cost of that neglect later. We see it exploding in our schools, in our courts, in our communities, just like it is doing now. And we have had a long period prior to 2018 of neglect. And so while we may say that time has passed, the truth is that it can take you many months, many years in some persons' cases to build a house, but a wrecking ball comes quickly and swiftly, and it takes a while to build back and recover. And so when we invest in the right tools for the time, when we pair accountability with opportunity, discipline with possibility, we do more than fight crime. We build a Barbados where young people believe and where they are invested. Mr. President, if we are honest, one of the greatest antidotes to hopelessness is hope. And so purpose is also, I feel it would be remiss of me today to not say that purpose is discovered oftentimes through service and through giving back and through contributing to something bigger than yourself, believing in something bigger than yourself. And this is why the role of non-governmental organizations, youth groups, and service organizations has been central to this government's response. This is why they are consulted at every level. This is why we are now invited to the social partnership. This is why we ask for them to participate. Because I know some have rubbished the idea that this is a national response, and it might be easier to make it political, but the reality is that if we are not all hands on deck, then it cannot just be the government. It cannot just be one section of society. Everyone has to see their part. And so I remember when I was about 14, my sister took me to the Barbados Youth Development Council, and she said that I grew up in neighborhoods that persons often count out. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention them here. And she wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to see beyond my environment, my immediate environment, that I had the opportunity to dream outside of what I saw daily. Something that we are trying to do through the Oceana Hub and through the other programs that teach young people how to swim and expose them to other areas of life. And I was able to volunteer at the International Youth Day, the National Youth Festival. I was able to lead food drives, host retreats for young people. And I was young, still young, but I was younger then. And one of the things that it taught me is that in helping others, I was able to transform and to see something bigger than myself. And so instead of being this desperate, or instead of feeling lost or idle, I felt like I had dignity as a young person, that I was not a problem to be solved, because oftentimes we talk about young people as a problem to be solved and not co-pilots in creation of the future. And so oftentimes, Mr. President, we whisper the positive stories of young Barbadians, while the negative headlines seem to scream at us daily. In every community, there are young men and young women who are choosing service over violence and entrepreneurship over crime. What we are seeing is a minority. And so if we are to change the culture, we have to also share those stories, and I believe that to be very important. Give them platforms like the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors, the National Youth Awards, in order to allow them to stand as models for their peers with the loudness that gangs often confront us in our communities. And so this government, Mr. President, I could say that as someone who continues to work with youth organizations and who has a non-governmental organization myself, this government continues to support through the National Peace Program, through the different ministries, through the Youth Development Program, through community development. Have you seen how many programs are being run weekly by the Community Development Program? If you haven't, you should check them out on Instagram. In order to assist and provide young people with avenues to advance. And so through the Barbados Youth Development Council, that has received greater funding and support under this administration, through the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors Program and the National Youth Parliament, of which I was a member, they are able to speak freely. It is not symbolic, it is strategic. It ensures that young people are partners in nation building, and it shifts volunteering from the exception to the expectation, and that is why I applaud the government's intention to ensure that service organizations are mandatory or an obligation, so that we teach young people that it is important and it is vital to focus on something bigger than yourselves. I have seen it at work. I have seen young women come into programs and young men come into programs who are angry, who feel isolated, and who have found community in these organizations. I had one young man in wrapping up a program, his quote was, "Came in a potato, left as a fry." And it meant that he came in as one thing, but he had left transformed. And this is not unique to simply him. There are many young people that if you ask them, they will tell you that their lives have been turned around by community, by these organizations. And so the truth is simple, Mr. President, and this is not a side note to this debate. As I prepare to close, what I want to say is that governance is not a perfect job, and I've said that before. And I cannot say to you, and I do not expect, I am not naive to believe that we will always get it right. But what I do know is that the Prime Minister, and indeed the members of Cabinet, and members in this honorable chamber, all of us, are committed to a conviction that every Bajan girl and every Bajan boy has the right to thrive and has the right to excel wherever they so wish to do so once it contributes positively to Barbados. And what I know is that we have a responsibility, and we recognize the weight of that responsibility. As I have stated, we have done so since 2018 to provide them with opportunities that allow for their potential to shine through the provisions of opportunities, and we remain unmoved in this philosophy. Mr. President, as I stand to close, I want to return to where I began, that I am the youngest member of this honorable house, and I see it as a unique perspective. I also use social media quite a lot. And I listen and I hear what my generation says. And the truth is that a lot of our frustration is built on the feeling that we are not moving fast enough. And sometimes fast will only get us so far, and the results that we want will not happen tomorrow. And so we have to put our hands to the plow. We do not have the luxury of opting out of governance as young people. We do not have the luxury of opting out of democracy. We do not have the luxury of choosing our individual rights and freedoms above the collective good. That is not how society works. Societies cannot function like that. Selfishness feeds gangs. A desire for self feeds criminals without thought for others, without empathy. And so we are not waiting idly by for a savior. And we do not believe, and we cannot believe, that there is a cure-all for crime. No single law, no single program, no single policy will do that. On that we are certain. On that we can agree. But I am certain that we can also agree that the police have a job to do. And we ask them daily to protect and serve. We ask them daily to look out for our best interests. We ask them daily to ensure that we are not held by fear. And so while we must be guided by the past, we cannot be paralyzed by it. And I sat here and I wondered if that is the suggestion, that we be paralyzed by fear and paralyzed by the past, so we do nothing. And today I stand to say that that would simply be unacceptable and irresponsible. And so I stand and support this bill because I believe that the government understands, based on the legislation that it has brought since 2018, based on the kind of policies it has enacted since 2018, that we have a responsibility to not only secure the country for today, to not only ensure that it is here for literally tomorrow, but for many years to come. Because when our great forefathers sowed the seed, the things that we are confronting for them may have been unimaginable. And therefore, it is our responsibility to imagine beyond what they believed and give our young people a fighting chance at tomorrow. And with that, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you, Senator Trim, for the first of many speeches in this honorable Senate. Thank you very much for making me a speech.
President, I beg to move that we do now suspend the sitting of the Senate for lunch to return at 3 p.m.
The question is that the honorable Senate, the sitting be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 3 p.m. today.